At 71, after Roy Cotter spent 3 days in a county hospital and neither of his grown children got on a plane, he came home to the small house in Beaver Creek, Nebraska, where he had lived with his wife Delphine for 49 years. And he sat down at the kitchen table across from her and said the sentence out loud that he'd been carrying for 3 days. So, when the county auctioned a broken-down 1996 Fleetwood Bounder at the fairgrounds for $18, unclaimed for 3 years, the last property of a country doctor nobody could find, Roy and Delphine raised their hands together and bought it. The town called them foolish. Their son called them impractical. Their daughter did not call at all. But under the mattress panel in the back bedroom of the 32-foot motorhome, Roy found 48 years of a dead doctor's patient journals. Over 3,000 elderly people scattered across the sandhills whose only reliable health care had walked into the woods one winter afternoon and never come back. Roy handed the top journal to Delphine at the kitchen table, where they had made every decision of their marriage, and Delphine read the first entry, and she looked up at her husband and said, "We can do this." That was later. First, there was the hospital and the empty visitor chair and the phone call that never came. The stroke had not been a stroke. The doctor at the county hospital in North Platte had told Roy that after 20 hours of tests, using the careful voice doctors use when they have to give a patient news that is both good and complicated at the same time, what Roy had experienced in the produce section of the Beaver Creek grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 2023 had been a transient ischemic attack, a TIA, a small warning shot from a body that was letting him know something. Roy had stood in front of the tomatoes with a can of tuna in his hand and had suddenly not been able to remember what tuna was called, or where he was, or why he had a can in his hand at all. The brawn boy who worked the register had come out to check on him because Roy had been standing very still for a long time. Roy had said, "I can't quite think." The brawn boy had called an ambulance. Delphine was at the hospital within the hour. She sat in a plastic chair beside Roy's bed and held his hand, while a resident asked him a series of questions Roy could answer perfectly by then, and could not have answered at all 45 minutes earlier. She stayed the first night, the second night, the third. She slept in the same plastic chair with a hospital blanket over her legs because she was not going to leave him alone in a room with fluorescent lights and a beeping machine. And if he had woken in the night unable to remember the word for tuna, she wanted to be the face he saw. The hospital had a phone in the room. Delphine used it on the first morning. "He's in the hospital," she told her son Brian in Denver. Brian was 44 and a vice president at a software company that made scheduling tools for large hospitals, which was a fact Roy and Delphine had both noticed over the years and had never said out loud to each other. "He had a small stroke, they think. He's stable. But I wanted you to know." Brian said the right things. He was very upset. He was very sorry. He said he was in the middle of a product launch that could not be delayed. And could he fly out the following week? And would that be all right? And Delphine had said, "Of course, honey. Next week is fine. Next week is better even." And she had hung up and sat looking at the phone for a long time. Brian did not fly out the following week. There was a delay with the product launch. He sent flowers, roses, delivered to the hospital by a national florist the same day, with a card that said, "Get well soon, Dad. Love, Brian and the family." He called every day for the first week and then every other day for the second week. And by the third week, the calls had gone back to Sunday evenings only, which was when he had always called anyway. Delphine called their daughter Kaya in Chicago on the second morning. Kaya was 41 and worked in marketing for a beauty company whose products Delphine had never bought and could not have named. Kaya cried on the phone. Kaya said she felt terrible. Kaya said she had a work trip to Milan the following week that she absolutely could not get out of. And could she fly out the week after? And Delphine said, "Of course, sweetheart. The week after is fine." Kaya did not fly out the week after. There was a follow-up meeting in Paris. She sent a card and a check for $150. Delphine put the card in the drawer of the kitchen table, where she kept the cards their children sent, of which there were now 41 years of cards, one drawer very full. She put the check in the account she and Roy had opened in 1988, when they had first tried and failed to save for a trip to the Grand Canyon. Roy came home from the hospital on a Friday. Delphine drove because Roy was not to drive for 6 weeks per doctor's orders. The car was quiet the whole way home. Roy watched the sand hills pass by the passenger window, the low rolling hills of grass in every direction, the color of old brass in the October light, the small ranches sitting far apart with cattle dotted across the pastures like punctuation. At the kitchen table that evening, Delphine had made stew, because stew was what she made when there was nothing else to say. She set 2 bowls down and sat across from Roy. Roy looked at the stew for a long time before he picked up his spoon. Then, Roy said the sentence he had been carrying for 3 days. "I don't want to die in this house with nobody knowing I'm gone for 3 days." Delphine set her own spoon down. She reached across the small table and took Roy's hand. Her fingers were thin and warm, and she had worn her wedding ring so long that the skin under it had gone permanently paler than the skin around it, a band of memory pressed into her hand. "Then we don't sit here waiting for it," she said. They talked until midnight, not about the children. They had talked about the children enough over the years that they no longer had anything new to say about the children. And both of them knew that if they started that night, they would only end up saying the same tired things they had been saying for 15 years. So they did not start. What they talked about instead was what they had, and what they still could give, and where the two of them could still be useful to someone. Roy had spent 42 years as a rural mail carrier on Route 3 out of Beaver Creek. He had known every farmhouse and ranch and shut-in and widow on his 60-mile route. He had brought Marge Ostrowski her prescriptions on his own time for the last decade of his career, because Marge had lived alone 12 miles out on the county line road and could not drive to town. He had found Ed Kubalik dead on his porch on a February morning in 2016 and had been the one to call the sheriff, because Ed's mail had not been picked up in 3 days, and Roy had known what that meant. Roy had learned first aid the year he turned 35, because too often he had been the first person to find someone who had collapsed alone, and he had wanted to know what to do until the ambulance came. He was, at 71, more useful than he looked. Delphine had been a nurse's aide at the Cherry County Nursing Home for 38 years and then a hospice caregiver for another 5. She had held the hands of more dying people than she could count. She had learned to change dressings and give shots and read a blood pressure cuff and recognize when a fever meant something serious. She was a licensed CNA, still in good standing with the state of Nebraska. She had renewed her license the year before out of habit, because she had renewed it every year for 43 years and had not been able to bring herself to let it lapse. Between them, at the kitchen table on that Friday night in October of 2023, they were most of what a rural free clinic actually needed. They just did not have a place to be one. They started saving. Roy had a pension from the Postal Service, and Delphine had Social Security and a small pension of her own from the nursing home. Between them, they had enough to live on, but not much more. What they saved carefully. They cut the cable television. They stopped eating at the diner in town on Sundays. Delphine took over cutting Roy's hair. Roy fixed the washing machine himself the one time it broke, ordering the part from a supplier in Omaha, and watching a video on the library computer twice before he did the work. They saved for 14 months. They saved $4,220. That was the amount in the envelope when they went to the county tax auction at the Cherry County Fairgrounds on a cold Saturday morning in December of 2024. Not because they had a plan for what they were going to buy, but because Roy had read in the county newspaper that the auction was happening. And Delphine had said, "Let's go see what's there." The fairgrounds parking lot was mostly empty when they arrived. 50 or 60 people stood in small groups near the auction shed, breath white in the cold air. A folding table at the front held clipboards with the property listings. Roy took one. He read down the list to Delphine while she blew on her hands. "A tractor," Roy said. "A trailer with a broken axle. Somebody's snowmobile. A shed. And," he paused, "a 1996 Fleetwood Bounder motorhome. 32 feet, condition listed as poor. Impounded 3 years for non-payment of storage fees, contents included." Delphine looked at him. "An RV." "Yes." They walked over to look at it before the auction started. It sat at the far end of the fairgrounds lot, up on cement blocks because 2 of its tires had gone flat and 1 had gone completely. The brown and beige stripes down its sides had bleached to almost cream in 12 winters of Sandhills weather. A cracked windshield on the driver's side, a door on the passenger side that hung slightly crooked in its frame. Beneath the dust and the grime and the sun-bleached paint, though, the vehicle was intact. Nothing rusted through, no panels missing. The tires could be replaced. The engine, if it turned at all, could be worked on. Roy walked the length of it slowly. He looked at Delphine. "It's an ambulance," he said. "It's a clinic. It's a house. It's whatever we make it into." Delphine looked at the Bounder for a long moment. Then she looked at Roy. "How much do you think it will go for?" "Nobody wants it. Look at it. It's been sitting here 3 years." Roy paused. "I think it goes for whatever they open at." The auction started at 10. The auctioneer worked through the lots in a flat, fast voice. The tractor went to a man in a Carhartt coat for $650. The snowmobile went to a teenager for $200. The shed went to a woman for $80. "Lot 15, the auctioneer said. 1996 Fleetwood Bounder motorhome. 32 feet. Condition poor. Contents included. Storage lie 3 years. Will open at $18. He said it like he expected to take it back. $18, just to start the failure. Roy raised his hand. So did Delphine, both at once, both slow and steady. The auctioneer paused. He looked at them for a moment. He was a Cherry County man, and he knew Roy from 42 years of mail delivery. "I've got $18 from Roy and Delphine Cotter." He scanned the room out of habit. "Do I hear 20? Nobody breathed to make it 20. A man behind them laughed low. "Going once, going twice, sold. The Bounder to Roy and Delphine for $18. They paid in cash at the clerk's window inside the fairgrounds shed. $18 in ones and a 5 and a 10. The clerk, a woman Delphine had known since kindergarten, slid the deed across the counter and then a small brass key on a plastic loop. "You know what you bought," Nadine said. "I know we bought a project," Roy said. Nadine looked at them both a long moment. "Do you know whose it was?" "The newspaper didn't say." Nadine leaned forward. "Waldo Priestley, the country doctor. He used to make house calls out of it, up and down 20 and 83 and all the county roads for I don't know how many years. He disappeared 3 winters ago. His mind had gone. He walked out into the Bessie National Forest one afternoon, and they didn't find him till spring." She paused. "This RV was where he kept his practice. I don't know what's inside it now. Nobody's opened it since the sheriff went through in 21. Roy and Delphine stood at the counter for a long time. "Thank you, Nadine," Delphine said finally. They walked back out to the bounder. Roy fit the small brass key into the passenger side door lock. It turned with the gritty resistance of a lock that had not been opened in 3 years. The door swung outward with a long groan. The smell hit them first: dust, old fabric, the faintly sweet smell of paper that had sat in sealed air for a long time. Roy climbed in first and helped Delphine up after. Inside, the bounder was a single long, narrow interior, cluttered but not chaotic. A driver's seat and passenger seat in front. A small kitchen with a 2-burner propane stove and a small sink. A dinette against one wall. A tiny bathroom with a stand-up shower. And at the very back, behind a folding door, a bedroom with a queen mattress laid flat across a plywood platform. The dinette table was buried in paperwork. Loose sheets of medical charts. Prescription pads. A stethoscope hung on a peg beside the driver's seat. An old-fashioned doctor's bag sat on the passenger seat, closed, its leather cracked at the corners. In the small kitchen, a coffee mug with the inside ringed dark. A pill bottle on the counter, empty, the label yellowed past reading. Someone had been running a medical practice out of this RV until 3 winters ago. Delphine stood in the middle of the interior with her coat still buttoned and her breath still visible in the cold air, and she said quietly, "Oh, Roy." Roy did not answer for a moment. He was standing at the driver's seat looking at the stethoscope on the peg. Then he said, "We need to get it home." They spent the next 3 weeks getting the bounder home. 2 new tires, a new battery, a tow charge from a man Roy had known 30 years who charged them half his usual rate because Roy had brought his mother's prescriptions to her for the last 2 winters of her life. The bounder came to rest in the gravel drive beside their small house on the 2nd Sunday of January. Roy and Delphine walked through it that first evening at home, with the interior lights working for the first time in 3 years. Roy started at the front. Delphine started at the back. The paperwork on the dinette turned out to be recent patient charts, dated up to the fall of 2021. Roy stacked them carefully. He would need to figure out what to do with them, because they contained real medical information about real people, but not tonight. Delphine was in the back bedroom when she found the loose panel. She had knelt down to check underneath the plywood mattress platform to see if there was storage space beneath. There was. The whole space under the bed was a storage compartment with a hinged plywood lid. She lifted the lid. Under the mattress platform, packed carefully in stacks, were journals. Dark, leather-bound notebooks, the kind a country doctor would carry in his bag. Delphine counted the stacks with her eyes and stopped at 48, because 48 was more than she had been expecting. "Roy," she called. Roy came back. They lifted the journals out together and stacked them on the mattress. 48 in all, each one dated on the spine in black marker. The earliest said 1971. The latest said 2019. Delphine sat on the edge of the mattress and opened the top one, which was dated 1971. The handwriting inside was neat and slanted slightly to the right. The first entry read, April 3rd, 1971. First day. Bought the Fleetwood from a dealer in Grand Island. She runs. First patient was a rancher named Vernon Hollis, 63, up on the county line by Merriman. Diabetic ulcer on the foot, badly infected. Cleaned it, dressed it, gave him a course of antibiotics. He gave me a jar of his wife's choke cherry jelly. I told him I'd be back the following Tuesday to check the foot. Drove home on 20. First day. Delphine turned the page, then another. The journal was a running record of a country practice. Every patient Dr. Waldo Priestley had ever seen, from that first day in April of 1971 through the last entry Delphine flipped forward to find, dated November 2019. Almost 50 years. Neat handwriting in every entry. The names, the ranch locations, the diagnoses, the treatments, the outcomes. She turned to Roy. He was seeing them all in the RV, she said. The whole Sandhills. 50 years. Roy sat down beside her on the mattress. He picked up a journal from the middle of the stack, one marked 1994. He opened it at random. October 12th, 1994. Visited Mrs. Duffy at the Ida Grove Rest Home. 91. Mostly for a chat and to check her blood pressure. She thinks I'm her son. I don't correct her anymore. She was smiling when I left. Her real son lives in Omaha and has not visited in 2 years. Roy read it twice. He set the journal down carefully. How many patients you think are in there? Delphine did the arithmetic in her head. 50 years, 20 patients a week, average, 1,000 a year. 50,000 patient visits, roughly, over the whole run. Thousands of people, she said. Not different people, but thousands of visits. Maybe 3,000 different patients over the whole time. 3,000 people, Roy said. Most of them dead by now, of course. Some of them not, Roy said. The ones who were young in his early years would be our age now. Some of them still on those ranches. Some of them still shut in. Delphine looked at her husband across a stack of 48 journals in the back bedroom of a 32-foot motorhome they had bought for $18 at a county auction. And she saw the shape of what they had walked into, and it took the wind out of her for a second. Roy, she said, I know. We can do this. I know. They spent all of January and February reading the journals. They did it in the evenings, after dinner, in the small back bedroom of the bounder, which Roy had cleaned and Delphine had put fresh sheets on because they had started to prefer being in the RV to being in the house. The bounder had a small propane heater that Roy had gotten working, and a small lamp beside the bed, and sitting side by side in that warm, narrow space with a journal open across their knees felt more like being together than sitting in the 2 chairs of their kitchen ever had. They did not say this to each other, because they did not need to. They read 48 years of Dr. Waldo Priestley's practice. They read about a country doctor who had spent his whole adult life driving the county roads of the Sandhills, seeing patients other doctors would not see, in places other doctors would not go. Priestley had never charged more than a jar of jelly or a dozen eggs. He had lived on savings and on a small trust his father had left him. He had never married. He had never taken a vacation, as far as the journals showed. He had made his last visit on November 19th, 2019, to a woman named Beulah Voss up on the Cherry County line, and had noted in her chart that his own memory was beginning to slip, and that he did not know how much longer he could keep doing the work. He had disappeared 18 months later. Walked into the Bessie National Forest one afternoon in April of 2021 and never come out. His body had been found by hikers in early June. The RV had sat at the county fairgrounds ever since because Priestley had no next of kin, no will on file, and no one to claim it. Delphine finished reading the last journal on a Thursday evening in late February. She closed the leather cover. She sat for a long time looking at her hands. Then she looked at Roy. We start with the ones who are still alive, she said. How do we know who's still alive? We call. We drive out. We show up at the door. We say we knew Dr. Priestley. We ask if we can help. Roy nodded slowly. And then what? Then we bring the RV. We park it in the yard. We check their blood pressure. We look at their prescriptions. We call their kids if they'll let us. We stay 2 or 3 hours. Delphine paused. We do what he did. We just do it because we're two of them now, not because we're doctors. Roy was quiet a long moment. You know what people are going to call this, he said finally. I do. They're going to call it foolish. I know. Brian and Kaya are going to be embarrassed. They are. Roy took her hand across the closed journal. I don't care, he said. Neither do I, Delphine said. They started with a woman named Ellen Rademacher. Roy had chosen her because her name was in the journals from 1978 all the way through to 2018. 40 years of steady visits. And because the last entry Priestley had made about her noted that she was, as of 2018, 76 years old and living alone on a ranch 14 miles north of Beaver Creek. That put her in her early 80s now, if she was still alive. They called first. Roy had gotten her number from the county directory. The phone rang 8 times before a woman's voice answered. Ellen Rademacher? Yes, ma'am. My name is Roy Cotter. My wife Delphine and I live in Beaver Creek. You don't know me, but I've been reading through some of Dr. Waldo Priestley's old journals, and your name is in them a lot. We're wondering if we might drive up and see you this Saturday. We don't want anything. We just wondered how you were doing. The line was silent time. You knew Waldo, Ellen finally said. No, ma'am. I never met him, but my wife is a nurse and I was a mail carrier out on Route 3 for a lot of years, and we've bought his RV, and we've read a lot of what he wrote about the people he saw. We thought some of those people might still need someone to check in on them. That's all. Just a visit. Another long silence. Nobody's checked on me since November, Ellen said. That was the county extension man delivering a pamphlet about grasshoppers. If you want to drive up, you drive up. I'll put coffee on. Roy and Delphine drove up in their pickup truck that Saturday. Not the RV, because the tires on the RV still needed replacing, and Roy wanted to make sure the RV would be ready before they started using it as more than an office. The pickup was easier for a first visit anyway. Less of a spectacle. Just 2 people showing up. Ellen Rademacher was in her doorway when they pulled into the drive. She was a small, thin woman with white hair and a braid down her back and a face like a walnut. She wore a house dress and a cardigan and slippers. She stood in the doorway watching them get out of the truck. Delphine got out first. Delphine had put on a clean blouse and had done her hair the way she used to do it for church. She walked up to the porch slowly. She stopped at the bottom step. Mrs. Rademacher, I'm Delphine Cotter. This is my husband, Roy. Thank you for having us. Come in. They sat at Ellen Rademacher's kitchen table for 3 hours. Delphine took Ellen's blood pressure with the cuff she had brought in a small canvas bag. It was high, not immediately dangerous, but high. Ellen said she had run out of her blood pressure medicine 4 months ago and had not gotten to the pharmacy in Valentine to refill it because Valentine was 90 miles away and she had not been driving since her cataract surgery. Delphine wrote down the name of the medicine. Roy said he would drive to Valentine on Monday morning and pick it up and bring it back on Tuesday. Ellen said that was too much trouble. Roy said no, it wasn't. Then they just talked. Ellen had lost her husband in 2011. She had 2 sons. One of them was a truck driver based in Oklahoma who came through twice a year. The other lived in Denver and worked as an accountant and had not come to Nebraska in 6 years. He sent her a check every month, which she deposited without cashing because she did not need his money. She needed him to come. She had a landline phone. She was too far out for cell service. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. She had a Bible on the kitchen table and a stack of Reader's Digests on the couch, and she had not spoken to another human being in person in 12 days when Roy and Delphine walked in the door. By the time they left, Ellen was crying, and Delphine was crying, and Roy had gone out to the truck to check something twice because he did not want either of the women to see that he was crying too. They promised to come back the following Saturday. Ellen said thank you. She said it 4 times. They drove home in silence. Halfway back to Beaver Creek, Roy pulled the truck over on the shoulder of Highway 20 and stopped and sat with his hands on the steering wheel, looking out over the sandhills. Delphine did not ask what he was doing. She waited. "That was one," Roy said. "That was one. There are hundreds." "Yes." "Delphine, what are we doing?" Delphine was quiet a moment. "We're doing what we should have started doing 40 years ago," she said. Roy nodded once. He put the truck back in gear. The next Saturday, they went back with Ellen's blood pressure medicine and a casserole Delphine had made. Ellen had baked pie. They stayed 4 hours. The Saturday after that, they visited 2 people. On the 3rd Saturday, 3. By the end of March, they had visited 11 people from Dr. Priestley's journals, all of them elderly, all of them living alone, all of them at various degrees of being forgotten by families and healthcare systems both. 6 of them had prescriptions Delphine wanted to review with a doctor. Roy had already been thinking about that. He drove into North Platte on the last Monday of March and walked into the office of Dr. Neil Rutherford, who had been Roy's own primary care physician for 22 years and who had been the doctor at the county hospital, who had told Roy his TIA had not been a stroke back in the previous October. Neil Rutherford was 68. He had been talking about retiring for 3 years. Roy sat down across the desk from Neil and told him what he and Delphine were doing. Neil listened without interrupting. When Roy was done, Neil took off his glasses and set them on the desk and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You want me to be the doctor on this?" "I want you to be the doctor on this, for free." "Yes, sir." "Roy, I know what I'm asking." Neil Rutherford looked at Roy for a long moment. "I've been trying to figure out for 3 years what I was going to do with my last 5 or 6 years of being able to work," he said finally. "I was going to travel with my wife. That was the plan. But my wife has told me for 2 years now that if I take her to one more place with a beach, she is going to throw me into the ocean." He put his glasses back on. "I'll do it. 1 day a week to start. If you can bring me the charts on Wednesday evenings, I'll review them and write scripts where I can. When you can bring the RV to town, I'll ride out with you on Saturdays. That's my offer." Roy put out his hand. Neil shook it. By the middle of April, they had a functioning setup. The bounder was parked in Roy and Delphine's driveway during the week. On Wednesday evenings, Delphine took the week's patient notes down to Dr. Rutherford's office. On Saturdays, they either went out to visit 2 or 3 patients in the truck, or Dr. Rutherford drove out with them to bigger clusters. He was a licensed physician. Delphine was a licensed CNA. Between them and Roy's basic first aid competence and 42 years of knowing the roads of Cherry County, they were doing something the state of Nebraska had no rule against, and the medical establishment had no framework to categorize. They were simply 3 retired people driving out into the sandhills to see if anyone needed anything. They did. By the middle of May, they had seen 41 people from the journals. Word had spread through the county, and it was starting to spread beyond it. A woman in Cherry County had called them, because her mother in Custer County had heard from a neighbor in Rock County that there was a couple driving around checking on old people. Could they come down? Could they see her mother? Could they see her mother's neighbor too? The neighbor was 87 and had a rash on her leg that she was too proud to go to the doctor about. They said yes to every request. If you have made it this far into Roy and Delphine's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Because in the 3rd week of May, a black SUV Roy did not recognize pulled into his gravel drive on a Thursday afternoon, and a man in a dark suit got out. The man was in his early 40s, tall, well-groomed, and wearing the kind of suit that told Roy without a single word being spoken that this was not a neighbor. "Mr. Cotter." "That's right." "My name is Craig Hallman. I'm the Regional Vice President for Meridian Rural Health." Roy did not shake the hand Hallman offered. He kept his own hands in his pockets. "You want to come inside, Mr. Hallman?" "If you don't mind." Roy took him into the kitchen. Delphine was at the sink. She did not turn around when they came in. "Mr. Cotter, Mrs. Cotter, I'll be direct. My company operates 17 telemedicine kiosks across the western Sandhills. Those kiosks serve 9 counties. We're a critical piece of the rural healthcare infrastructure in Nebraska. Our data shows that in the last 2 months, our patient volume in 3 counties has dropped by roughly 40%. Roy said nothing. "Mr. Cotter, that drop correlates precisely with the timeline of the operation you and your wife are running out of your RV." "It's not an operation," Delphine said, still at the sink. "Ma'am, it's my husband and me checking in on people. There's no operation." "Ma'am, with respect, you are traveling with a licensed physician on Saturdays. You are administering blood pressure checks. You are reviewing medications. That is medical care. That is a practice. And unless it is properly licensed as a mobile medical facility, and unless the physician's practice is properly registered with the state, and unless the arrangement is properly insured, you are exposed to significant regulatory action from the state of Nebraska." Hallman set a manila envelope on the kitchen table. "This is a courtesy letter from our compliance office. It requests that you cease operations pending proper regulatory review. If you continue, we will have no choice but to refer the matter to the state medical board." Roy looked at the envelope. He did not pick it up. "You drove out here," Roy said, "to hand me a threat. Mr. Cotter, I drove out here to help you avoid a serious mistake. What you and your wife are doing is admirable. It is also, in its current form, illegal. My company is offering you a path to compliance. Register with us. Operate under our umbrella. We can provide the licensing, the insurance, the framework. You continue seeing patients. We handle the paperwork. Everyone wins." "And what do you get out of it?" Delphine said. She had turned from the sink now. "We get compliance. We get a rural care model that fits our operational footprint. You get our patients." Hallman smiled thinly. "We serve them. You want to put them on your kiosks. Ma'am, telemedicine is..." "They are 85 years old and cannot see the screen and cannot remember how to unlock a touchpad and have been sitting in their houses for 4 years, being told to use a kiosk that is 32 miles away. You do not serve them. You have never served them. If you had, we would not be out there right now." Hallman's face went cool. "Mrs. Cotter, I'm trying to help you here. You are trying to shut us down. I am trying to prevent the state medical board from shutting you down." Roy stood up. "Mr. Hallman, you've said your piece. You can find your way out." Hallman stood up too. He picked up the envelope and left it on the table. "I hope you'll consider our offer, Mr. Cotter. Seriously, I don't want to be the one who has to file this complaint." He walked out. Roy and Delphine stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the SUV pull out of the drive. "Do you think he'll do it?" Delphine said. "He'll do it," Roy said. That night they sat at the kitchen table, and Roy opened the envelope and read the letter carefully twice. The letter alleged unlicensed practice of medicine, operation of an unlicensed mobile medical facility, and improper administration of medical services. It gave them 30 days to cease operations or face state action. Roy set the letter down. "We need help, Delphine." "I know. We need a lawyer." "I know." They found Winnie Ashford through Dr. Rutherford. Neil had made 3 phone calls after Roy had brought him the letter on the following Wednesday, and by the end of the day he had a name. Winnie Ashford, 78 years old, retired federal healthcare attorney, lived in a small ranch outside of North Platte. She had spent 37 years working on rural healthcare policy at the federal level. She had come home to Nebraska in retirement. She took occasional cases that interested her for free. Roy called her. He explained the situation in 3 sentences. Winnie asked him to come see her on Friday afternoon. Winnie Ashford was tall and white-haired and had the composed bearing of a woman who had spent her career being underestimated in rooms full of men. She met Roy and Delphine on the porch of a small ranch house set back from a county road amid low rolling grass. She had them sit at a wrought iron table on the porch. She poured coffee. She asked to see the letter. She read it twice. She set it down. She looked at Roy over the rims of her reading glasses. Mr. Cotter, Mrs. Cotter, this letter is not a legal document. It is a threat. Meridian Rural Health has to demand you cease operations because you are not operating a medical facility. You are 2 private citizens making social visits to elderly people. One of you a licensed CNA who is fully within her scope to check a blood pressure and review a medication list. And you are occasionally accompanied by a licensed physician who is fully within his scope to see patients wherever he chooses to see them, including in their own homes and in your motorhome, which is his private consulting space when he is inside it. Nebraska has no law against any of this. Meridian is trying to frighten you into surrendering because their business model does not survive against the alternative you are demonstrating exists. She paused. I have been waiting 15 years for a case like this. Roy leaned forward. Ms. Ashford, we can't pay you. I did not ask you to pay me. You'll take the case. I will handle Mr. Hallman for you. You will not speak to him again. If he calls, you will give him my number. If he sends another letter, you will forward it to me unopened. You will continue doing exactly what you have been doing. When Mr. Hallman escalates to the state, which he will, I will be waiting. Winnie set her coffee down. Now, tell me about Waldo Priestley. They told her. Winnie Ashford listened for an hour without interrupting. When Roy finished describing the journals and the patients they had begun to visit, Winnie took off her glasses and folded them carefully and set them on the table. Waldo Priestley delivered my granddaughter in a farmhouse 30 miles from a hospital in a snowstorm in 1993, she said. He drove up from Broken Bow in his RV through 8 inches of snow that night because my daughter had gone into labor early and no other doctor would come. He was in his 50s then. My granddaughter is 31 years old now and lives in Denver with 2 children of her own. She would not be alive without him, and neither would her children. She looked at Roy and Delphine. I did not know about the journals. I did not know he had kept a record. I did not know he had disappeared. I found out about him only after his body was recovered in 2021, and by then, he had been gone for months. I have been carrying a debt to that man for 31 years. She picked up her glasses again. You are not going to have to worry about Meridian Rural Health, Mr. Cotter. I am going to worry about them. You go back to work. They went back to work. Through late May and into June, they visited 17 more people from the journals. Neil Rutherford came out on Saturdays and set up a small examining area in the RV's dinette space and saw patients Roy and Delphine had prepped for him during the week. A retired pharmacist named Etta Van Dorn in Beaver Creek had heard about what they were doing and volunteered to help them manage the medication reviews, working on her kitchen table at night, taking no pay. They had a network now. They were not doing anything they had not been doing before. They just had more people helping them do it. Then the woman came to them. Her name was Ella Hallman. She lived in a small trailer 22 miles south of Beaver Creek on the county line. She was 58, considerably younger than most of the patients Roy and Delphine had been seeing, but she had called them because she had heard from her neighbor Marge Hutchins, who was on the priestly list, that a nice couple in Beaver Creek was checking on people. Ella said she did not need much. She just had a knee that hurt more than she thought it should, and she had not seen a doctor in 3 years because she did not have insurance and could not afford the copay and had no way to get to a doctor's office anyway. Delphine and Roy went to see her on a Tuesday afternoon. Ella Hallman lived alone. The trailer was small and clean but bare, the kind of clean that came from a person who had time and not much else to do with it. Ella had made iced tea. She sat with Delphine at a small kitchen table while Delphine looked at her knee, which was swollen and warm, and clearly needed attention beyond what Delphine could offer. Ella had lost her husband 4 years earlier. She had a son, just the one. He worked in healthcare, she said, in some kind of executive capacity. She was not sure exactly what. He lived in Denver. She had not seen him in 4 years. He sent her money every month, which was kind of him, but which she had not asked for and had not needed. She would rather he called. He didn't much. She was crying quietly by the time she finished. Delphine reached across the table and took her hand. "What's your son's name, Ella?" "Craig." Delphine went very still. "Craig Hallman." "Yes. Do you know him?" Delphine looked at Roy, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the small trailer, letting Delphine do the work. Roy met her eyes. "Ma'am," Delphine said, "I've met your son just once, but I've met him." "You have?" "Yes." "How was he?" Delphine thought about it for a long moment. She thought about Craig Hallman in her own kitchen 4 weeks earlier, in his charcoal suit, with his manila envelope and his practiced smile. She thought about the man's face, and how it had not been the face of a cruel man. It had been the face of a man who had built his life on numbers, and who had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that numbers had mothers. "He looked tired," Delphine said. "He looked like a man carrying a lot he did not know how to put down." Ella nodded slowly. "He was such a soft-hearted boy," she said. "He'd cry at commercials. I don't know what happened." Roy and Delphine took Ella to the county hospital that same afternoon. The knee was more serious than Ella had let on, a torn meniscus with early signs of infection. She would need surgery within the week. Delphine sat with her in the emergency room until she was admitted. Roy called Dr. Rutherford, who called ahead to the orthopedic department and made sure Ella would be seen quickly. Delphine stayed with Ella overnight. She slept in the chair by the bed. In the morning, when Ella was being prepped for surgery, Delphine did something she had not asked Ella permission to do. She stepped into the hallway with her phone, and she called the number on the manila envelope in her kitchen at home, which she had memorized without meaning to. Craig Hallman answered on the second ring. "This is Craig, Mr. Hallman. This is Delphine Cotter." There was a pause on the line. "Mrs. Cotter, your mother had a fall in her trailer yesterday. She has been in the emergency room since yesterday afternoon. She's going into surgery in 20 minutes for a torn meniscus that had started to abscess. She wanted me to call you. She wanted you to know. That is all I am calling to tell you." Craig Hallman was silent for a very long time. "How is she?" "She's frightened. She's alone. She hasn't seen you in 4 years." Another silence. "Which hospital?" "North Platte, Great Plains Health. I'll be on a plane in 2 hours." He hung up. Delphine went back into Ella's room. She held Ella's hand until the orderly came to take her to surgery. Craig Hallman arrived at the hospital at 7 that evening. Delphine was still in the waiting room. She had been sitting there for 11 hours. Roy had brought her food and coffee twice. She had refused to leave until she knew Ella was through surgery and settled in recovery. Craig came through the automatic doors of the waiting room in the same dark suit he had worn to her kitchen. His tie was loose. His face had gone through something on the flight from Denver. He stopped in the middle of the waiting room and looked around and saw Delphine sitting in the corner. She stood up. "Mr. Hallman, Mrs. Cotter." He was crying. He was not trying to hide it, and he was not doing a good job, even if he had been. "They put her in room 342, Delphine said. "The surgery went well. She's asleep." "Thank you." "She's been asking for you." "Thank you." He stood in front of her a long moment. He seemed to be trying to say something and not able to find the words. "Go on up," Delphine said. "She's waiting for you." He nodded. He walked to the elevator. Delphine sat back down in the corner chair. She waited another 2 hours. Then Craig came back down. He sat in the chair beside her. Neither of them said anything for a while. "How long have you known she was alone up there?" Craig said finally. "I met her 3 days ago." "And you drove her to the hospital?" "She would have been in that trailer another week before anybody found her. I know because I have been visiting people like her for 4 months." Craig put his face in his hands. "I'm going to withdraw the complaint against you," he said, muffled through his hands. "The letter. Meridian will not be pursuing this. I'll handle it Monday. Mr. Hallman, I did not call you today because I wanted the complaint withdrawn. I called you because your mother wanted her son. I know. I want you to know that. I know." He took his hands away from his face. He looked at Delphine. His eyes were red. "When did you last see your own children, Mrs. Cotter?" Delphine thought about it. "Brian was here at Christmas. Kaya was here at Thanksgiving the year before last. So it's been about 10 months for Brian and about a year and 8 months for Kaya. And your husband had a stroke, a TIA. But yes." "Did they come?" "No." Craig nodded once. "How do you not hate them, Mrs. Cotter?" Delphine was quiet a long moment. "I stopped waiting on them to be who they were not going to be," she said finally. "That was the hardest part. And once I did that, I found out I had space in my life for other people who needed a mother. And I found out that being one to them was what I had wanted to be doing the whole time. My children are my children. I love them. I'm not going to change them. What I could change was what I was doing with the time I had left. That's what changed." Craig looked at her for a long moment. "I quit my job on the flight up here," he said quietly. "I called the CEO from the plane and told him I was done. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I know I am not going to spend another day doing what I've been doing." Delphine reached over and put her hand on top of his. She did not say anything. They sat in the hospital waiting room for another hour. An elderly stranger and a middle-aged man who had once tried to shut her down. Both of them tired, both of them, in different ways, done with the lives they had been living. When Craig finally stood up to go back to his mother's room, he stopped at the door of the waiting room and turned around. "Mrs. Cotter." "Yes." "If you ever need someone to help with the paperwork side of what you're doing, I know a lot about how healthcare organizations work. I could probably be useful." "I know you could, Mr. Hallman. I'd want to help, if you'd let me." "We'll talk when your mother is home." He nodded. He went upstairs. They talked when Ella was home. Craig moved back to Nebraska 3 months later. He rented a small apartment in North Platte. He took a job, not a job in the corporate healthcare sense, but a role as the operations coordinator for what Roy and Delphine were now, at Winnie Ashford's insistence, incorporating as a formal nonprofit under the name The Priestly Circle. Winnie handled the incorporation paperwork. Dr. Rutherford came on as the medical director. Etta Van Dorn came on as the pharmacy coordinator. Roy and Delphine ran the daily operations out of the Bounder, which stayed parked in their driveway during the week and went out on Saturday visits during the growing seasons. Craig handled the compliance and the fundraising and the paperwork that Roy and Delphine had been doing at their kitchen table late at night for 4 months. He was, it turned out, very good at this work. He had been very good at it his whole career. He was doing it now for reasons that were his own. Ella recovered from her surgery. She moved out of the trailer and into a small apartment in North Platte, 10 minutes from Craig, and Craig had dinner with her 3 times a week and stopped by every morning on his way to the office. Ella came to Roy and Delphine's house for Sunday dinner most weeks. She had become their friend. By the end of the year, the Priestley Circle had visited 231 people from Waldo Priestley's original journals. Almost half of the 3,000-plus patients Priestley had seen over 50 years had died in the intervening decades, but many were still living, and Roy and Delphine were slowly working through the rest. They had trained one other retired couple, a former teacher named Marilee Sanborn and her husband Dwayne, a retired county extension agent, to run visits in an adjacent county. Marilee and Dwayne used their own vehicle. The bounder stayed with Roy and Delphine. Their own children heard about it. A story ran in the North Platte Telegraph in September. It was picked up by a wire service. Brian saw it in Denver. Kaya saw it in Chicago. Both of them called on the same Sunday. Brian flew out for a weekend in October. He sat in the passenger seat of the bounder while Roy drove him out to a ranch 15 miles north of Beaver Creek to visit a 90-year-old widower named August Poehler. He watched his mother check August's blood pressure. He watched his father sit at August's kitchen table, listening to August talk about his late wife for an hour. Brian did not say much on the drive home. When they got back to the house that evening, he sat with Roy on the porch and asked quietly why they had never told him what they were doing. "You didn't ask, son," Roy said. He said it without accusation, the way he had learned to say things over the last year. Just a fact. You would have if you'd been the person who asks. You're not that kind of person. You never were. That's not a fault. That's who you are. And I love who you are. Brian cried on the porch. Roy sat beside him and did not try to stop him. Kaya came for a week at Thanksgiving. She helped Delphine bake for 4 days. She rode out on a Saturday with Delphine and Neil Rutherford to see 3 patients in the RV, and she sat in the dinette taking notes on Delphine's charts because Delphine had told her that was what she could do to help, and she did it. She flew back to Chicago on the Sunday after Thanksgiving. She sent Delphine a card the following week that said only, "I love you, Mom. I'm going to try harder." Delphine put the card in the drawer with the other cards, but she took it out and read it 3 more times over the following months, which was more than she had done for any of the other cards Kaya had ever sent her. Whether Brian and Kaya would change permanently, Roy and Delphine did not know. They had stopped, sometime in the last year, needing to know. The story does not end with a reconciliation, because reconciliation is not the point. The point is that Roy and Delphine had spent 49 years building a life around the 2 people who did not, in the end, choose to build one back around them. And when Roy nearly died in October of 2023, they had understood that the life they had built had not been enough. And rather than sit in it and be bitter, they had gone out and built a different one. Larger, less private, less centered on the 2 people they had raised, and more centered on the hundreds of people the world had forgotten. They became parents again, in a way, to the parents of other people's grown children who had also stopped visiting. They became for Ella Hallman, and for August Poehler, and for Ellen Rademacher, and for 230 other elderly people scattered across the sandhills, the presents their own children had not been for them. And in doing that, they had discovered, at 71 years old, that the wound of being abandoned by the people you had raised did not have to close by their return. It could close by opening your life to everyone else who had been abandoned too. On a summer evening in June of the following year, Roy and Delphine pulled the bounder out of the driveway and drove 12 miles east on Highway 20 to a small ranch belonging to a woman named Mabel Duttweiler, who was 91 years old and had been on Priestley's list from 1974 all the way through 2018. Mabel had told them on the phone that morning that she would put coffee on for 4 o'clock. Roy pulled the bounder into her gravel drive at 3:50. Delphine had a pan of cornbread on the small counter inside, still warm, wrapped in a dish towel. Mabel was on the porch. She stood up slowly as Roy and Delphine climbed down from the bounder, and she came to the top of the porch steps in her house dress and her cardigan, and she said, in a voice clear and strong across the 20 feet of yard between them, "I've been watching for you all afternoon." Roy stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at her. "Mrs. Duttweiler, come on up, both of you. I've got the coffee on and there's a plate of cookies I made this morning that I have not had a single person to eat with. I've been waiting." Delphine climbed the steps with the cornbread. Roy came up behind her with the medical bag. Mabel Duttweiler opened her screen door for them and they went inside. Two of them had spent 49 years believing that a life was made of the two people you brought into it. And it had taken a hospital stay, an $18 motorhome, and a dead country doctor's 48 years of patient journals to teach them that a life was actually made of who you decided to be watching for you. They had spent their whole marriage being watched for by two people who, when it came down to it, did not watch back. They spent the rest of it being watched for by everyone else.